Tell me, how does it feel to be 80?
I keep being asked that, and it feels just like 79.
Well, many years ago, just after the Second World War, John and I went to Scotland with our parents to our relatives, and they sent us outside to play, and we saw a tram coming along the road, so we decided to get on it, and we went to a seaside place called Portobello, and they didn't know where on earth we were. And that was it.
Did you get into trouble? What happened when you came back?
Well, I don't really remember, to be quite honest.
Dad, just to say happy birthday.
There was a young schoolboy from Norwich whose dream was to study at college. But first on the field he had much to prove. He was good with the ball and boy could he move. That feisty young lad with such courage. For he was keen as mustard and knew he could be trusted to give of his best in every test. To play up, play up, play up, play up, play up and win the game.
I mean, I spent those years in Norwich from the time I was born, really, until the time I left Cambridge. And I suppose the big thing was, in 1944, I remember very well going with my mother to the City Hall to be interviewed by the Director of Education and by the headmaster of Norwich School, Andrew Stevenson, which was a very interesting experience, I have to say.
That apparently it wasn't all top marks, was it? He's never ever mentioned this to me. So apparently, one day, because he got some sort of scholarship, he was on a bursary, and every year he had to go back with his grades. And if he didn't get the right grades, he was in trouble. So apparently one year there was a massive dip in performance, never been mentioned before, and he turned up with the grades, and apparently some old man said, "If you carry on with grades like this, son, you're out, there's no more bursary." So he went home and started working.
And there I went, and I stayed there for 7 years, and I did, I suppose, become a bit of a linguist. That was my thing. There were lots of things I was not good at. I was not any good at chemistry or science or physics or maths. These were all really sort of beyond my comprehension. So I went to the army, and I thought this would be a doddle because, I'm a linguist and there's the BAOR, so, I'll probably get put into the signals or something very non-militaristic like that, and I would get a National Service Commission and they will send me to Germany because I speak German. So I got my calling up papers, and it said, "You will report to the Royal Norfolk Regiment at Nelson Barracks in Norwich." So I thought, that's a bit of a mistake here, but no doubt it'll be put right soon. So I caught the bus up to the barracks. I've been there a short while, probably about 3 or 4 weeks, and some officer said, "We'd have to explain to you what is going to happen to you lot." So he said, "You're going to spend 6 weeks here, and then you'll spend 10 weeks in Bury St Edmunds training centre, and then you'll be put on the next boat to Korea." And I thought, this is very strange. I didn't even know where Korea was. I hadn't heard of Korea. To the point that I went home and said to my mother, I said, "Do you know what they've just told us? So that, we should pay attention to our training. And they've told us that they're going to send us to Korea." And she started crying. So I said, "What are you crying for?" She said, "They mean it." So, however, I hadn't been there very long. I'd only been in the army about 3 or 4 weeks, and then I got this sort of summons to go to London, to what was then the War Office. And so I found this building somewhere in Whitehall. I went into. I had to go through 3 security checks, and I ended up in this room, quite a big room, and there were about 4 or 5 people on the other side of the table. some of whom were officers, with red bands, and some of whom were civilians, and they quizzed me a bit. And the end result was they said, "Well, Holmes, would you like to learn a language?" So I said, "Yes, I would." So I said, "Okay." He explained to us that we were there to learn Russian, and this is all very top secret, and we would be living on this base, and we would be bussed into Cambridge every day. We had to wear civilian clothes because it was all top secret. So there we were. We were bussed into Cambridge every day, and we spent all the morning 9 till 1, various lectures. We spent the afternoon 2 hours every afternoon in groups of 2 conversing with some Russian, and we had a word list to learn every night, and we had an exam every week. And if you failed any of these exams, you got sent back to where you came from.
A clever young man from Norwich got his degree from Clare College. Rusky and Deutsch, he spoke it all, and still on the pitch he was having a ball. That ambitious young chap, full of knowledge. In a ruck he twisted a knee, so a bed on a ward found he. Then his heart gave a flutter, and he began to stutter. A smile from a nurse had turned him to butter. Yes, the love of his life, 'twas she. For she could see he was keen as mustard, and knew he could be trusted to give his best in every test, to play up, play up, play up, play up, and win the game.
After this, they courted. That's what they used to do in those days. Now that means going out. They went out together, and then all of a sudden, quite quickly, he persuaded her to marry him. And hey presto, Jane arrived on the scene. So suddenly, John was a dad with a lovely young wife and a very restless baby. And for those of us that have had children, we all know what a delight it is to have a first child. Unfortunately, Jane was not a great sleeper. And Dad spent a lot of his young fatherhood walking Jane around Primrose Hill, carrying her up to the 5th floor flat, I think it was, at which point she used to wake up and scream. So he used to get sent round to Primrose Hill again.
So following on from that, his career went from strength to strength. He was moving around the country, working in IT as a consultant. They moved back up to Hull, where Richard was born, then down to Bournemouth, and then in the mid-60s to Maidenhead, where I came along as another little surprise.
And so 80 is really very, very old indeed. And I just thought we'd start off by remembering that Groucho Marx said, just so you know, anyone can get old. You just have to live that long. So it's not that clever.
Dad had a pretty tough time over the next period of his life, as Mum was ill and in and out of hospital for many years. He was commuting up to London and got a very good job at the BBC, at which he excelled. And while he led BBC publications, they had triumph after triumph, from Delia Smith to The Ascent of Man, and the Radio Times was huge, with a regular circulation of 8 to 9 million.
But you were pretty rubbish at DIY. And this is a family tray that's carried on through the generations. It was really screws, walls and things like that were his downfall, and I will always have it etched into my mind. It's a bit like a YouTube clip that replays itself time and time again in my head, of this enormous cupboard full of crockery and things falling slowly onto Mum in the kitchen. And after we found out he'd actually, Julian, you'll appreciate, he'd nailed it to the wall. So yeah, that was a traumatic experience for a young man to suffer.
My DIY skills. Now, when we first got married, we lived in a small apartment near Primrose Hill, at the top of many stairs. We didn't have a lot of money, and so we couldn't afford to buy a playpen, which is a big thing in those days. You can find your children a playpen, so you knew that they were safe when you went out of the room. Well, when it came to moving day, we were moving from this top floor flat, and we were busy going up and downstairs with the stuff, and Jane was ensconced in the playpen. until we came up the stairs, and so I saw she was at the top of the stairs. So I thought, well, how could this be? So I went to the sitting room where the playpen, I should say, had been, but was now just a pile of sort of dowel rods. And I thought, well, that is something I do have to work on.
Since Dad has always taken his role as grandfather so seriously, Richard and I thought it would be interesting to get some feedback from the grandchildren.
So we wanted to find out what they really thought of you. Okay. And we thought it would be helpful to know what your strengths are and maybe some of the areas you'd like to work on for the next 8 years. So, in the birthday spirit, let's start with the things that they think you do very well. And by the way, just for the grandkids, this is going to be mostly anonymous. Okay. So one of the things they all thought, pretty much all of them thought you did very well, which was opening your own presents. Because they think you're more excited about your presents than they've ever been about their own. They also, of course, think you're extremely good at making cakes. Yeah. There's a very high level of customer satisfaction here, and there were some special mentions of the Thomas the Tank Engine cake, the gingerbread house, the hedgehog with removable chocolate flakes, a Laser Quest cake, and a Teddy Bear's Picnic, which I think we can pretty much all remember. For those who don't know, he did make a special birthday cake every year for every grandchild, so that's a remarkable achievement. But let's go back to the positives. They almost all said you know a lot about everything. You can take that one of two ways, I guess. A few said that you bossed them around too much, and Ben said it would be better if you didn't sleep when you took him to the cinema, but if you are going to sleep when you take him to the cinema, please stop snoring, because
making cakes together and like going through all of his books, looking to see which one's the best one, and then and the gingerbread houses that he used to make on Christmas. Oh, they're the best. The stained glass windows and everything. But yeah, that's my favourite thing about Grandpa. And my love for cakes now has carried on. Definitely.
I love you. Happy birthday. Hope your birthday's been really good.
So thank you for supporting me in all my concerts and music at church and at school, and I think you're one of my biggest fans.
So I remember when I was off school with my hip problem, and I used to spend a lot of time with Grandma and Grandpa looking after me, and Grandma especially always thought that I never complained much about my illness and ailment, and I think the truth of that is that Mum finds that quite amusing, because it was when I actually had to go back to school that I started complaining, because I'd enjoyed being with Grandma and Grandpa so much and spending time with them. So happy birthday, Grandpa, and thanks for everything and looking after me and Grandma.
the teeth have been an endless source of fascination and a source of many jokes for both children and grandchildren over the years. The grandkids, I think each of them at some time, have really wondered for themselves whether it wouldn't in fact be quite a cool thing to be able to take their own teeth out and clean them properly. So my little ode isn't quite as long as Peter's, but Matthias and I put this together. My goodness, John, you are 80 already. Already time is a thief. But remember, you're only as old as you feel, and quite a bit older than your teeth. So now let's raise our glasses to Dad, John, Grandpa. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Anyway, I don't want to repeat what everybody else has said, because I didn't get where I am by making long, boring speeches. But you do have to thank people at this stage. First of all, I have to thank you all for coming. Some of you have come from far distance, from the from the Channel Isles, from Cornwall, from Newcastle. So and Norwich, you've made long journeys, and so pretty much the whole family has come together, except for Matthias, who's in Canada skiing, and Rachel, who could not come. So I have to thank Joan for putting up for me with these more than 50 years. I have to thank the 3 children for arranging this party, for being what they are, and for producing all those wonderful grandchildren. So that's been a big part of our life. So that's all I want to say. So I thank you all again. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday to